guess it's 2 videos because I was interrupted. That's fine. That's fine now, I suppose. Looking at it, I don't like this. So I'm gonna change that to, anyway, what I had been saying was that I, kind of felt, like, I was having, I had reached a point where I was having trouble sleeping, having trouble just kind of living my life, I guess. And it was affecting a lot of things. I was kind of dissociating in my classes, and that was, I mean, somehow I still got really good grades that semester, but it was still emotionally trying, I guess, and exhausting, of course. It was a difficult time for me, for a handful of reasons. And so it finally got bad enough that I ended up listening to my friend's counsel and praying about it. And I felt like maybe I shouldn't be leaving. And that was difficult for me to stomach, honestly. Not because it was surprising. Honestly, in the back of my mind, I was very well aware that this was a terrible idea. I just wanted to do it anyway, and that was rather foolish of me to push it, I guess, because I ended up wasting more money than was necessary, because I was being stubborn. And it was a difficult time for me because I felt like my plans that I'd kind of wrapped my security in a lot of ways around. These were the plans to keep me safe from my feelings about this guy, to keep me safe from my family and from myself, to have this long-term goal. That was kind of what motivated me in a lot of ways, and to have that all stripped away, or to have my impression of it all stripped away in that instance, was pretty difficult for me to cope with. And one of the things that just kind of stuck in my mind, I guess, was Psalms 23, where it describes Jesus as being a shepherd. And that image just kind of stuck with me. I kind of just thought a lot about how shepherd leads his sheep where he is. He doesn't, I guess, abandon them or expect them to figure out where to go or how to protect themselves, and he doesn't lead them any place that he doesn't himself go. And that was an immense comfort to me to just have that message and that confidence that if God wanted me to stay back, and if that was what was best for me, that I wouldn't have to figure it out what that looked like on my own, and I wouldn't have to live it out on my own, that he would be with me. And that was very meaningful to me, and that image is kind of what inspired this piece. So I kind of wanted to take the time, I guess, to explain that a bit better in this painting, since it's kind of, I think, getting to a point where it's fairly close to being done. I really am not super excited by how white this is. So just to kind of give some background in the progression of this piece, my original thought my vision for this piece, I guess, had been of like black silhouetted figure silhouetted against a sunset, which you can still kind of see the sunset colors around, but it's not dark. And so I'm experimenting with the idea of having, instead of a black silhouette in the shadow, of having a white lighted silhouette as being the source of light for my painting, which seems to be an equally poetic, I guess, image. But and one of the reasons that I felt strongly about wanting this figure to be a silhouette is because I have pretty severe hesitations, I guess, with the idea of painting a face of Jesus. It's my personal conviction, and I wouldn't judge somebody else for having a different conviction, but my personal conviction is to be extremely cautious with painting an image of Christ, so as not to misrepresent, I guess, and not to marginalize, I guess, or be inaccurate, I guess, in my visual depiction of him. I feel like that's something that's kind of important to me. And one of the things that I was trying to avoid was, it bothers me, honestly, how a lot of paintings have white Jesus, and here I am painting a white Jesus. And so I'm not really sure how to feel about this. I'm really not super hip on this idea, especially as I'm making it out. I mean, on the one hand, it's obviously not racially white because it is very pale, unless I wanted to try to say that I was making the argument for albino Jesus, which is a whole another step into absurdity, I think. So I'm not really positive how I feel about this. And I'm considering whether to continue painting this whiteness, or whether to go back to the original plan and just make it a dark silhouette as I'd originally planned. I'm not really sure what's going to end up happening here. My mental health has been something that I don't know, it feels like it follows me. I've experienced a lot of different, let me think of how best to describe this, states of being, I guess, but oftentimes, my experience has been one of hopelessness and depression. It's definitely something that I've experienced a lot of, and one of the greatest comforts that I've personally had has been my relationship with Jesus, which is such a strange phrase, I think, and I think that it can be very confusing to people, because I feel like sometimes people use that phrase, relationship with Jesus, in such a blasé or passive way, without really thinking about what a phrase like that actually means. And I think that's unfortunate in a lot of ways, for a lot of reasons. And this palette is such a mess. I really don't want any of these green tones in there. I think I'm actually going to move this yellow I'm mixing somewhere else. I'm not really sure where though. Screw it. I'm just gonna grab another palette. So that's one of the nice things about using these disposable palettes, is that when it's full, you just grab another one and you don't have to. I guess I'm not as concerned about wasting these colors as just getting colors I don't want mixed in. I can just start fresh over here and not be too concerned about it. And that's something that I personally value. I never would have thought to use a disposable palette, except that one of my friends gave me a whole pack of them because she was thinning her own supplies, and I'm really thankful for that because I use them often. I've gone and distracted myself, haven't I? So when I talk about a relationship with Jesus, I think like I was saying, I think that a lot of people use that phrase without thinking too much about what it means. And I think that's pretty unfortunate. I think that it's such an important thing. It's been such a hugely important thing in my own life, important aspect of my own life, and it's given me hope when without it, I've reached levels of pretty severe hopelessness in times when I've been, I guess, distracted from that relationship. So when I talk about a relationship, I'm trying to think of how to what words to most accurately describe what the heck I'm talking about, because those words are so strange. They kind of have this mystic they sound very mystic in a lot of ways, and not real. And I think that that's partially because sometimes people use the words and don't really describe what they're meaning. And so when I talk about my relationship with Christ, I'm not talking about something that's a hypothetical or that's going to happen eventually. It's something that's so extremely real to me that it's hard to explain. I think that this relationship has like strongly influenced so much of who I am and how I act and how I think, and I think that it's hard to think of myself, honestly, even being alive right now, outside of the context of that relationship. Because it's been such an influential thing for me. Wow, that's a lot of black. What was I thinking? Oh my goodness. You know what, I'm just gonna develop that shadow, and then I'm gonna go back over top with the flesh tones, because that is ridiculous. I'm just gonna not even bother trying to wipe it off. I'm gonna get on top instead. get some of this over how to speak words. Wow, language is failing me. Get some of that from the top. I think that one of the reasons that Jesus and my religion has been so essential to me is because I have this experience of instability and this strong desire to find stability, and verses like Numbers 23, 9 and 10 that talks about how God is a God who doesn't change. He's not like people that lie or that change their mind. God is faithful, and what he's promised, when he's promised to bless, he's going to bless, and he's not going to be manipulated into changing his mind or tricked into changing his mind. And that is a verse that's really stuck to me. I have this fear that I've struggled with for a long time, that I am not, I guess, worthy of care, that I'm not worthy of positive attention, I guess would be one way of phrasing it. And that once people get to a point where they understand, I guess, who I really am, if they ever get to a point that they see the real me, that they'll just leave. And I think that I could spend all day trying to explain to you kind of why I feel that way, but just I do. And so because of that, having this promise from God that he's not going to change his mind, that he's going to be faithful regardless what happens, and even just that he knows me, and that he's not somebody who's surprised by who I am or the things that I do, that he is somebody who knows those things. There's a song that talks about how God knows our thoughts before we speak them, and he knows where we sit and where we stand and where we sleep and everything about us, and he's not surprised by these things. These are things that he is very well aware of, and he's knowing these things already. He has chosen to love us and to sacrifice himself for us so that we don't have to be good enough to earn his favor, so that we don't have to be stable in ourselves, but that we can rely on him. Another image that was really present in my mind last June was the image of Jesus when he was on earth. He told a parable, and in that parable he described the wise man who built his house on a rock, And if you build your house on this rock, Jesus said, then even when storms come, and even when rains fall, you won't be moved. But the foolish man builds his house on sand. And Jesus kind of explained this parable in that building your house, building your life on shaky foundation, it just leads to the only result from doing that is going to be that it's going to fail. And the foundation that Jesus was saying when he said this foundation was God's character, was who Jesus himself was, and him. It wasn't our own understanding. It wasn't the foundation of all the things that I know or that I do. It was the foundation of just him, just his presence in holding us and in sanctifying. And sanctifying is a churchy word that people use. And again, I think sometimes it's a word that people have heard, but maybe don't fully understand what that means, or what the Bible means when it talks about being sanctified and being sanctified. I think that being sanctified is something that's described well, and I think that process is described well in James 1, where it talks about rejoicing in our trials, because that is how God perfects us, how God makes us whole and complete, lacking nothing. And I think that is the goal. That's what sanctification is. It's the process of becoming whole and complete, lacking in nothing. And so when it talks about lacking in nothing, I think it's obvious based on the context that this lack is not something physical. So, because otherwise suffering wouldn't be involved. This lacking nothing is a character thing. It's a strength thing. It's a relying on God Himself thing. And I think that it's I think that's the important part of sanctification, that relying on Jesus and relying on God to finish the good work that He's started in us. And He's fully capable of using trials to do that. And I think that what one person experiences as a trial is going to be different than what another person experiences as a trial. But ultimately, everyone everyone experiences things that are difficult. We live on a planet that's full of darkness and full of evil, and I think that some people respond to that by strengthening their resolve to be independent and to be as they've defined themselves, or even as other people have defined them. Some people take these trials and they I don't know, they take these hard things and sometimes they even relish them. And as somebody who in my own experience. I have experience with things like suicidal idealization, which is kind of it's basically what the words sound like. It's idealizing the thought of committing suicide or self-harm, which again is exactly what it sounds like. I've hurt myself just to feel that pain or to punish myself. The motivations vary, but I think that it demonstrates that in myself there's been times when I've loved the darkness, and I hate thinking about that. I hate thinking that that's who I was, and even who I am at times. It's not something that I've flipped a switch and fully recovered from. It's still something that I struggled with. I have struggled with very recently, to be completely honest. It's something that hasn't just vanished. It hasn't just gone away and disappeared without a trace. Unfortunately, I wish I had the ability to say that this cure was instant and removed all temptations in my life. That has not been my personal experience. I'm sure that such a thing has happened before in other people's experience. Like, I would not be surprised to have heard that, but that's not predominantly what the message of Christianity is. Let me rephrase that. It's not what the message of the Bible is. God doesn't promise to remove all temptations from you. In fact, I've been thinking recently about how temptations were something that even Christ experienced. Hebrews says, and Hebrews says that in every way Christ was tempted just like we are, yet he was without sin. And so the Christian life isn't about avoiding temptation or being suddenly freed from temptation or suffering. Christ was described in Isaiah as being the suffering servant. I mean, you look at his life throughout his, even just when he was born as an infant, people were trying to kill him, Herod. And then throughout his earthly ministry, there were people who were constantly criticizing him and constantly dismissing what he had to say. He didn't live a life free of suffering even before the cross. And even on Passion Week, the people who were his friends, who were supposed to be his allies, abandoned him. Christ's story and Christianity is not one of fleeing from suffering, and it's not one of fleeing from temptation either. Jesus, maybe in heaven, was never tempted, but like I said, in Hebrews it says that here on earth he was tempted in every way, just like we are, and he still did not sin. And you can see that he willingly entered situations in which he would be tempted. The example that comes to my mind, because I've been thinking and praying about this with some of my friends, is the example of when Jesus went to he was baptized, and the Holy Spirit was present in that. And then the Holy Spirit did something rather strange to me, in that he led Jesus was led into the wilderness, where he would fast, where he would pray, and where he would ultimately be tempted. And this is something that Jesus chose to walk into this area of temptation. And so there's no promise anywhere in the Bible that we will reach a point here on earth of no longer being tempted. And so I think a lot of Christians have looked at mental health issues and the temptations involved there, and have said, if you would just become a Christian, if you would just submit your life to Jesus, then you would no longer be tempted in these ways. Because I think a lot of it is because maybe they have never experienced what people like me and others who've experienced mental health issues, they've never, people who say these things, they have never experienced them, and so they assume that it's something that Christians cannot experience. And I think that that's ignorant of them to think, and I think that that's dangerous for them to say. I've known I've known so many people who are not open to the gospel. They're not open to considering Christianity, and one of the reasons is because they felt like their issues were dismissed, their illnesses were marginalized, and that Christianity was trying to put a bandage solution on them. And as somebody who grew up in the church and also heard those kinds of messages and experienced the consequences of those kinds of thoughts, I really sympathize with that, and I really, I guess I understand why and how that could be so very hurtful and frustrating. I disagree, and I think that the message of Christianity isn't one of removing the temptation or the instantly fully understanding the truth, fully understanding and being confident in what Christ has said about who I am and who other people are and how I should act. And it's not, in my testimony anyway, it has not been one of instantly losing my self-destructive habits, not one of instantly not being tempted by them. I think the difference is, though, that although these are still things that tempt me, and these are still things that I experience, they're not things that have to control me. And that is the key in my testimony. That is the key difference that I've experienced. Not one of removal of temptation, but one of freedom. So what I mean by that is I'm no longer bound to act out these temptations. I'm no like when I have this impulse to we'll say one of the things that I have this impulse sometimes to just bang my head against something. I get frustrated, or I experience pain or hurt, or I'm angry at myself, or I feel trapped in a situation. And one of the ways that I'm tempted to respond is to just, whatever is nearest and hardest, I just want to bash my head against it. And sometimes this urge is something that's sudden. Sometimes it's something that comes slowly and over time. And in both cases, in Christ, it's something that I can combat. I can look at this urge that I have through the lens of who Christ has declared me to be, through the lens of who Christ has created me to be, and seeing it through that lens, I can, even if I feel like somebody completely different than the Bible describes me to be. Even if I feel like somebody who's completely worthless and who deserves to have my face smashed against things. Even when I have those feelings, I don't have to act on them. And I don't really know how to use my words to describe how profound that is. Because somebody who has never experienced the intense urge to dash their head against something might think that it might be easy to just not. And somebody who has experienced the intense urge to do something harmful to themselves might, it's easy to doubt that anything could ever get better, I guess. And so I feel I don't know. It's a hard thing to describe, I guess, and I understand the hesitation, I guess, is what I mean to say. I understand how somebody would, hearing this, find it difficult to process, regardless what side of the bench that they're on. And so I guess I leave it at that, full of compassion on both sides for people who hear this and maybe don't know quite how to respond to it. I know that I've definitely been in that place as well. I mean, I had a period of my own life when Christianity just seemed like such a I don't know, when I didn't believe that I could really be helped, when I felt extremely hopeless and extremely lost. And I guess I really understand that feeling, and I really understand how people get to that point, and how hard it is to move on from that point. And so if that's where you are, I mean, I would definitely be willing to talk to you, and give you more about my own testimony and how even when it seems hopeless and it seems like it wouldn't really be helpful, I'd be more than happy to talk to you a bit about my experience with religion from that perspective, because I understand that it can be extremely hard. And if you're from the other perspective, where you're hearing this whole story and you're I don't know, lost and confused, and you're like, I've never experienced anything like that, I don't understand how that can be something that people experience. I mean, I'd also be more than happy to talk to you about it, and just either way, I mean, just feel absolutely free to shoot a message and to contact me. I would be so honored either way if you wanted to talk about it. This hand is really confusing me, and I'm going to take a step back, because I feel like especially the thumb and the pinky look so terrible. I don't even know what to think about it, so I'm gonna take a step back, take a break from this. But if you've watched all this and if you've listened, then I'm really thankful. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to hear my voice and to watch my work. I'm excited about it, and I hope that you are too, and I hope that you are having a great day and that you are extremely blessed.